I was sitting in a military base halfway across the world when my wife told me she wanted to sleep with other men. And the worst part wasn't what she said, it was how casually she said it, like she was asking me to pick up milk on the way home. My name's Mark, I'm 37, a logistics officer in the US Marines, and I've spent the last 10 years building what I thought was a solid marriage with Sharon, my wife of 6 years. We met through mutual friends at a barbecue back when I was still a junior officer. She was 29 and teaching 3rd grade at an elementary school in Virginia. And I remember thinking she was exactly the kind of woman I wanted to build a life with. Smart, ambitious, put together, the type who had her lesson plans color-coded and her grocery list organized by aisle. We dated for 4 years before I proposed, and those early years felt right. You know, the kind of relationship where you finish each other's sentences and can sit in comfortable silence on long drives. She knew what she was getting into when she married a Marine, the deployments every year, 6 to 7 months at a time, the missed holidays, the video calls at weird hours because of time zones. And she always said she was proud of me, proud of what I did, proud of the stability I provided. My salary as a logistics officer is around $120,000 a year, which in the military world is pretty solid, especially when you factor in the benefits, the housing allowance, the healthcare, all of it. We bought a nice house in a good neighborhood, 3 bedrooms with a backyard, the kind of place where neighbors wave at each other and kids ride bikes down the street. Sharon drove a newer SUV. We took vacations twice a year. She had her yoga classes and her book club, and from the outside, we looked like the poster couple for successful military marriages. But somewhere around year 4 of our marriage, things started shifting in ways I didn't catch at first because I was gone so much. Sharon started getting really into fitness, which was fine. Everyone needs hobbies. But it wasn't just jogging around the block. She hired a personal trainer, started going to this fancy CrossFit gym, and suddenly her wardrobe went from Target basics to Lululemon everything. She joined a new yoga studio that cost more per month than our cable bill, and she started hanging out with this new group of women, the type who posted inspirational quotes on Instagram and went to brunch spots where avocado toast costs $15. I noticed her appearance changed too, not in a bad way, but in an expensive way. Her hair was always freshly highlighted. Her nails were always done. She started wearing makeup to the grocery store, and when I'd video call her from overseas, there was always this glow-up vibe that felt almost performative. I remember my buddy Mike, another officer who'd been through 2 deployments, pulling me aside one time and saying his ex-wife had done the same thing right before she asked for a separation, the sudden obsession with appearance, the new social circle, the gym routine that took up 4 hours a day. I brushed it off because Sharon and I had always been solid. We talked every day when I was deployed. She sent care packages. She never complained about the distance, and I thought maybe she was just taking better care of herself, which honestly, I encouraged. Then came the video call that changed everything. I was 3 months into a 7-month deployment, sitting in my small office on base with a cup of terrible coffee, ready for our usual check-in where we'd talk about her day, and I'd tell her sanitized versions of mine. She looked different on the screen. Her hair was down in this effortless way. She was wearing a low-cut top I'd never seen before, and there was something in her expression that I couldn't quite read, almost like she was nervous but trying to play it cool. We did the usual small talk for maybe 5 minutes. She told me about her students. I told her about a logistics nightmare I'd been dealing with. And then she said she had something important to discuss. The way she said it made my stomach drop, because in a military marriage, we need to talk. Usually means one of 3 things: someone's hurt, someone's cheating, or someone's leaving. She took a breath, looked directly into the camera, and said, "I've been thinking a lot about us, and I want to open our marriage." I actually didn't process it at first. I thought maybe the connection was bad and I'd misheard. So I asked her to repeat herself. She said it again, slower this time, like she was explaining a concept to one of her 3rd graders. She wanted an open marriage. She wanted the freedom to see other people while I was deployed, and before I could even respond, she hit me with the line that's been burned into my brain ever since. "I can't control my urges while you're gone, and it's not fair to expect me to wait around for months at a time when I have needs." She didn't say it like she was asking permission. She said it like she was informing me of a decision she'd already made, like she was giving me a heads up about a schedule change. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to keep my face neutral because I'm trained to stay calm under pressure, but inside I was going through every stage of grief at once. I asked her if she'd already been with someone else, and she got defensive, said it wasn't about that. It was about being honest and not living a lie, but she never actually said no. She started talking about how military spouses sacrifice so much, How she's been faithful for 6 years, but it's taking a toll on her mental health. How she read articles about ethical non-monogamy and thinks it could strengthen our relationship in the long run. I let her talk, and the more she explained, the clearer it became that this wasn't about loneliness or some emotional crisis. This was about wanting to have her cake and eat it too. She wanted to keep the financial security, the officer's wife status, the house, the SUV, the healthcare, all of it. But she also wanted the freedom to do whatever she wanted with whoever she wanted while I was overseas risking my life. I asked her point blank if she understood what she was asking, and she said, "I'm not asking, Mark. I'm telling you this is what I need, and I hope you can be mature enough to accept it." That word, mature, like I was the unreasonable one for not wanting my wife to sleep around. I felt this cold clarity wash over me, the kind you get in combat situations when everything slows down and you see exactly what needs to happen. I told her I needed time to think, and she smiled. Actually smiled, like she thought she'd won, like she thought I'd come around once I processed it. She said we'd talk more tomorrow, blew me a kiss through the screen, and logged off. I sat there for maybe an hour just staring at the wall, and then I called my brother, told him everything. And he said the words I already knew were true. She's either already cheating or she's got someone lined up. No one asks for an open marriage out of nowhere unless they've already got a plan. The next few days, I didn't call Sharon, I didn't text, I just went silent, and she clearly didn't like that because the messages started flooding in, asking if I was okay, saying we should talk, acting like nothing had happened. I used that time to think, to plan, to reach out to a lawyer back home through secure channels, and to make a decision that I knew would blow up my marriage but save my dignity. When I finally called her back 4 days later, she was all smiles again, ready to set boundaries and rules for what she kept calling our open arrangement. And I let her talk for a solid 5 minutes about how we'd navigate this, how I could have freedom too if I wanted, how it was all about trust and communication. Then I stopped her mid-sentence and said, "Here's how this is going to work. I'm cutting off your access to my accounts. I'm moving my direct deposit to a separate bank, and I'm filing for divorce the day I get back stateside." The look on her face was like I'd slapped her. Her mouth actually fell open, and she started backpedaling immediately, saying I was overreacting, that I was being controlling, that she just wanted honesty in our relationship. I told her she'd get her freedom, just not my paycheck with it. And I ended the call. She tried calling back 6 times that night. I didn't answer once. And when I finally checked the messages the next morning, they ranged from angry to desperate to manipulative. But never once did she say she'd made a mistake. She thought I'd bend. She thought I'd come crawling back. She thought the threat of losing me would be less scary than losing her lifestyle. But she was wrong about all of it. And that was just the beginning. The first thing I did when I got back stateside 2 months later was rent an apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom place with basic furniture and enough distance from our house that I wouldn't accidentally run into Sharon at the grocery store or the gas station. I didn't tell her I was back for the first 3 days. I needed time to set things up properly, meet with my lawyer face-to-face, get my financial situation locked down tight, and mentally prepare for whatever explosion was coming. My lawyer's name was David, former JAG officer who'd seen about 1,000 military divorces, and when I laid out the situation for him, he didn't even look surprised. He just nodded and said we had a solid case for abandonment of marital responsibilities and that Virginia's laws would work in my favor since she'd essentially admitted to wanting extramarital relationships. We filed the papers that same week, and David arranged for a process server to deliver them to Sharon at her elementary school on a Friday afternoon, which I know sounds cold, but she'd made it clear she valued her image and her social standing, so I figured getting served in front of her colleagues would light a fire under her to actually engage with the reality of what was happening. I spent that weekend setting up automatic payments for my half of the mortgage until the house sold, transferring my direct deposit to a new bank account she had zero access to, and changing passwords on everything from Netflix to our cell phone plan. The call started Sunday night around 7 p.m., 14 missed calls in 3 hours, and when I finally answered on the 15th call, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Something about how I was ruining her life, how everyone at school was talking about her, how I was being cruel and vindictive over one conversation. I let her finish. Then I asked her a simple question, whether she'd actually gone through with sleeping with anyone during the last 2 months of my deployment, and the silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't explicitly done it, but she'd gotten close enough that she felt guilty about the question. She tried to flip it around, asking if I'd been with anyone, and I told her the truth. No, because I'd been too busy doing my job and apparently being the only faithful person in our marriage. She started begging then, saying we could go to counseling, that she'd made a mistake, that she never actually went through with anything. But I'd already made my decision, and nothing she said was going to change it. The next few weeks were like watching a slow-motion car crash, where Sharon was both the driver and the wreck. She started posting on social media constantly, pictures from expensive restaurants with captions about living her best life, photos at hotels downtown, with carefully cropped images that made it look like she was on romantic getaways, gym selfies with her trainer conveniently in the background looking way too comfortable. She was trying to make me jealous, trying to show me what I was missing, but all she was really doing was broadcasting to everyone in our social circle exactly why I'd left. The military spouse community is tight-knit. Everyone knows everyone, and word travels fast, especially when an officer's wife suddenly starts acting single while her husband's name is still on all the paperwork and she's still living in base housing. I didn't have to say a word. People figured it out on their own. The invitations to couples events dried up for her. The other wives stopped including her in coffee dates and book clubs, and the few times she did show up to social functions, people were polite but distant. The kind of distance you keep from someone who's proven they can't be trusted. Meanwhile, I started showing up to official military events solo, looking put together and unbothered, and I made sure to be seen having conversations with successful, attractive women, nothing romantic, just professional networking and friendly chats, but the optics were clear. I was moving on and doing just fine. I posted a couple of photos from a work conference where I happened to be sitting next to a fellow logistics officer who was smart and accomplished and happened to look great in her dress uniform. I didn't caption it with anything dramatic, just tagged the event and the location, but I knew Sharon would see it because at that point my social media was still public and I knew it would eat at her. About 6 weeks after the papers were served, Sharon started texting me at odd hours, usually after 10 p.m., and the messages were a wild mix of anger and desperation. One night she'd tell me I was a coward for not fighting for our marriage. The next night, she'd send paragraphs about how much she missed me and how we could make this work if I just gave her another chance. She started asking questions about the woman from the conference photo, whether I was seeing someone, whether I'd moved on that quickly, and I realized she'd built this entire fantasy in her head where I'd be waiting around while she explored her options, and now that I wasn't playing that role, she didn't know how to handle it. The irony was almost funny. She'd wanted an open marriage so she could have freedom and security at the same time. But what she'd actually done was open the door for me to walk out completely, and now she was the one feeling abandoned. I didn't engage with most of her messages. I'd respond to logistical stuff about the house and finances, but I ignored all the emotional manipulation, and that seemed to make her more frantic. She started calling my parents, my brother, even my friends from the unit, trying to get someone to talk sense into me, to convince me I was throwing away a good marriage over a misunderstanding. My family shut that down immediately. My mom told her point blank that asking your deployed husband for permission to cheat wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a betrayal, and my brother apparently told her she should be grateful I was handling this through lawyers instead of making it uglier than it needed to be. Then came the night she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I heard the knock around 8 p.m. and looked through the peephole to see Sharon standing there in jeans and an oversized sweater, no makeup, hair in a messy bun, looking more like the woman I'd married than the Instagram version she'd been presenting to the world. I thought about not answering, but I opened the door and stood in the doorway, didn't invite her in, just waited for her to say whatever she'd come to say. She started crying immediately, told me she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been selfish and stupid, that the whole open marriage thing was because she felt neglected and wanted attention, not because she actually wanted to be with other people. She said her friends had all turned on her, that people at school were treating her differently, that she felt completely alone, and she needed me to understand that she never meant to hurt me. I stood there listening, and I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just this hollow certainty that we were done. I told her she'd made her choice when she decided her urges were more important than our vows, and that I wasn't interested in being her safety net now that her fantasy hadn't worked out the way she'd planned. She grabbed my arm and asked what she was supposed to do, how she was supposed to move forward, and I pulled away and said, "Figure it out the same way you were planning to figure out your open marriage, without me." She stood there staring at me like she couldn't believe I was serious, and then she asked if there was someone else, if that's why I was being so cold. I told her the truth. There was no one else. There was just self-respect and a refusal to be treated like a bank account with benefits. And that seemed to break something in her, because she started yelling, calling me controlling and heartless, saying I'd led her on by pretending to think about her proposal when I'd already made up my mind to leave. I let her finish. Then I stepped back inside my apartment and closed the door, and I heard her standing in the hallway crying for a good 5 minutes before she finally left. The divorce papers were officially filed, the court date was set, and Sharon's lawyer reached out trying to negotiate terms, asking for spousal support, half the value of the house, shared assets split down the middle. My lawyer countered with evidence of her abandonment of the marriage, screenshots of her social media posts that clearly showed she'd been dating or trying to date during our separation, and a timeline that proved she'd initiated the breakdown of our relationship, not me. Her lawyer backed off the spousal support request pretty quick after that, and we settled on a clean split where she'd get half the house value once it's sold, and we'd each keep our own vehicles and personal property, no ongoing payments, no strings attached. I was fine with that. I didn't want her money, and I didn't want to be tied to her for years through alimony payments. I just wanted out. The house went on the market 3 weeks later, and Sharon moved in with one of her yoga friends temporarily while waiting for it to sell, which I only knew because my brother's wife saw her loading boxes into a sedan at 10 a.m. on a weekday when most people are at work. The whole thing felt surreal. 10 years of history reduced to signatures on legal documents and furniture divided up like we were splitting up a business partnership instead of a marriage. Sharon sent me one final text the night before our first court appearance. It just said, "I hope you find someone who makes you happy, because I clearly wasn't enough." And I didn't respond because there was nothing left to say. She'd been enough until she decided she needed more, and that wasn't my problem to solve anymore. The divorce was finalized on a cold morning in February, about 5 months after I'd first filed the papers, which in Virginia is actually pretty fast for a contested divorce, though by the end Sharon wasn't really contesting much of anything anymore. We stood in that courtroom with our lawyers. The judge went through the standard questions about irreconcilable differences and asset division, and within 20 minutes it was over. Just like that, 10 years together dissolved in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom. Sharon looked smaller somehow, wearing a plain black dress instead of her usual carefully curated outfits. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and when the judge declared us legally divorced, she didn't cry or make a scene. She just stared at the floor and nodded. I felt a weird sense of relief mixed with something I couldn't quite name. Not sadness exactly. More like closing a book you'd already lost interest in halfway through. We walked out of the courthouse separately. She went left toward the parking garage, and I went right toward the street, and that was the last time I saw her in person. The house sold 2 weeks later for slightly above asking price, which was lucky considering the market had been unpredictable, and after the mortgage was paid off, and we split what was left, Sharon got about $73,000, and I got the same. I immediately put mine toward a down payment on a small townhouse closer to base, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Nothing fancy, but it was mine and mine alone. No shared history, no arguments about paint colors or furniture placement, just clean slate energy. I heard through mutual friends that Sharon moved out of her yoga friend's guest room and into a cheaper apartment on the east side of town. The kind of place where the parking lot has those tow-away signs every 10 feet, and the walls are so thin you can hear your neighbors' conversations. The lifestyle she'd been living, the expensive gym membership, the yoga classes, the brunches and spa days, all of that evaporated pretty quickly when she realized $73,000 doesn't last long when you're also paying rent and utilities on a teacher's salary of maybe $50,000 a year. Her social media went quiet for about a month after the divorce. No more hotel photos or gym selfies. And when she did start posting again, it was mostly inspirational quotes about growth and healing and learning to love yourself, the kind of content people post when they're trying to convince themselves more than their followers. What I didn't expect was the stalking, not physical stalking, but digital obsession that became increasingly obvious as weeks went by. She created what I'm pretty sure was a fake Instagram account. I figured it out because the profile had 0 posts but started trying to follow me and viewing any public stories I posted within minutes of me posting them. And the username was some generic combination of words that could have been anyone, but the timing was too consistent to be coincidence. Then my brother told me she'd sent him a friend request on Facebook from an account with a different name and a random profile picture, clearly trying to keep tabs on my family's posts to see what I was up to. That's when I blocked every suspicious account I could find, set all my profiles to private, and stopped posting anything personal. But it bothered me that she couldn't just let it go, that even after everything, she was still monitoring my life like she had some right to know what I was doing. My brother's wife saw her at Target one afternoon and said Sharon looked rough, sweatpants and an old hoodie. cart full of generic brand groceries instead of the organic stuff she used to insist on. And apparently she tried to make small conversation, but gave up when my sister-in-law kept her responses polite and brief. The messages started coming from numbers I didn't recognize about 3 months post-divorce. Texts that would say things like thinking about our anniversary or remember when we went to that beach in Florida, clearly trying to trigger some nostalgic response that would get me to engage. I realized she was using apps or services to hide her caller ID, sending texts from what showed up as blocked or unknown numbers, so I couldn't just ignore her main number. I never responded, just screenshot them and forwarded them to my lawyer in case I needed documentation for a restraining order, though it never escalated to that point. The texts eventually shifted from nostalgia to regret, long paragraphs about how she'd destroyed the best thing in her life, how she'd been influenced by her friends who were all divorced and bitter, how she wished she could go back and undo everything. One message particularly stood out. She wrote that the men she'd thought would be interested in her once she was free turned out to only want casual hookups, and that she felt used and disposable, which struck me as deeply ironic considering she'd wanted to use me as financial security while she explored those exact casual situations. I didn't respond to that one either, but I did think about how she'd gambled everything on this fantasy that life would be better without commitment, and reality had hit her hard. I ran into one of her yoga friends at a coffee shop about 6 months after everything was finalized, and she approached me cautiously, like she wasn't sure if I'd even want to talk to her. She told me Sharon had been asking about me constantly, whether I was seeing anyone, whether I seemed happy, whether I ever mentioned her, and the friend seemed genuinely uncomfortable delivering what was clearly a message Sharon had asked her to pass along. I kept it brief and told her I'd moved on completely and would appreciate it if Sharon did the same. The friend nodded and said she'd tried telling Sharon exactly that, but Sharon was convinced we'd eventually reconcile once I'd had time to cool off, like this was just an extended argument instead of a permanent ending. That conversation confirmed what I'd already suspected. Sharon had never actually accepted that I was gone for good. She'd been waiting for me to come back, to forgive her, to tell her we could work it out, and every month that passed without that happening was breaking her denial bit by bit. My life got significantly better in ways I hadn't anticipated. I got promoted to a senior logistics officer position about 8 months after the divorce, which came with better pay and more responsibility, and I started going to the gym regularly not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I actually enjoyed it. I reconnected with hobbies I'd let slide during the marriage, fishing trips with my brother, hiking on weekends, reading books that weren't about relationship advice or military strategy, and I felt like I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under years of trying to make someone else happy. I went on a few dates here and there, nothing serious, just coffee or dinner with women I met through work or friends, and it felt good to have conversations where I wasn't walking on eggshells or wondering what the other person's angle was. One woman I went out with a few times asked me about my divorce, and I gave her the short version, that my ex-wife had wanted an open marriage while I was deployed and I'd chosen divorce instead, and she looked at me with this expression of respect and said, "Good for you for knowing your worth." And that simple validation from someone who barely knew me felt more genuine than anything Sharon had said in the last 2 years of our marriage. The final piece of closure came almost a year after the divorce when I got a letter in the mail, actual physical letter with Sharon's handwriting on the envelope, forwarded from our old house address to my townhouse through the postal service redirect I'd set up. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won out, and inside was 3 pages of handwritten apology, talking about therapy she'd started, realizations she'd had about her behavior, acknowledgement that she'd treated me like a resource instead of a partner, and a request not for reconciliation but for forgiveness, so she could move forward without the weight of guilt. I read it twice. Then I put it in a drawer and went about my day, and I realized I didn't feel anger or satisfaction or even pity. I just felt nothing, and that's when I knew I was truly done. She'd wanted an open marriage, thought she could have everything without consequences, and instead she'd opened the door to a future where I wasn't part of her life at all, and that future turned out to be exactly what I needed. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.